Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. To those of you who are new here, thanks for joining me. And if you enjoy my tutorials and patterns, please do consider subscribing. For this tutorial, I will be showing you how to work up this crochet boho style top. For the materials, you will need yarn. I used Yarn Art Rose Garden, which is 100% cotton yarn, and this is a super fine yarn. The recommended hook on the yarn label is a 3mm hook, but I went up one size on my hook. That's for the pattern itself. For this foundation round, which was the cord that I had worked, I went up 2 sizes. So for the cord, I used a 5mm hook, and for the rest of the pattern, I used a 4mm hook, even though the recommended hook on the yarn label is a 3mm hook. Now, for the quantities, this was a 250 gram skein, which is 1,000 meters or 1093.60 yards. I ended up using the entire skein with just a little left over. So if you look at it here, this was all that I had left over. The amount of yarn that you need really depends on the length that you're going for. For the tutorial, I'm working up a size medium, but you may work this to any size. You will use the measurements for the size that you are working as we go along into the tutorial. If you do find that working with a super fine yarn is tough for you, you may also go ahead and work with 4 plies. Now this one here says bamboo, so I don't know if it's made out of bamboo, but 4-ply in cottons would also work for this pattern. Now generally the recommended hook on a 4-ply is a 3mm, so I suggest that you also go up on your hook sizes. For the cord, you'll go up 2 sizes on the hook. I went up to a 5mm, and for the rest of the pattern, you'll go up 1 size. So that would be 4mm. Keep in mind that different weights of yarn give different results. I've tried this with the superfine and 4-ply. For both of them, it worked, although my initial foundation round differed. Apart from your yarn and your hooks, you'll need stitch markers, 4 of them, a pair of scissors, and a yarn or a wool needle. This pattern is worked according to body measurements. I will give the measurements for the different sizes. You will use the measurement for the size that you are working. So we'll begin at the neckline. We'll work a cord for the neckline, and then we'll separate that cord into 5 separations. That would be the front body, sleeve, back body, sleeve, and the front body. If you look at it here, here's the front body, then it's the sleeve, the back body, the sleeve, and this is the front body. Then we'll work the yoke, we'll work the bottom body, and then we'll attach yarn to the armholes to work the sleeves. So that's just a basic idea of this pattern. So let's get on with this tutorial. Hope you enjoy. We're beginning this pattern with our foundation round, and this is round 1. We'll form a cord. Okay, so here I'm using a 5mm hook, and this is super fine. When forming the cord, you do need to leave behind a really long tail end. So this is my tail end that I'll leave behind, and then I'll form a slip knot. To work the cord, you will wind that tail end over the hook. And then holding on to that little point that's formed from your slip knot, you'll yarn over on the yarn end, the actual yarn end, and you'll pull through on those 2 loops on your hook. So then again, it's wind over your tail end on the hook, yarn over and pull through on those 2 loops on your hook. So you continue on winding over on your tail end and pulling through on your yarn until you form this cord for the neckline. Now these are the actual stitches that we'll be working with. Continue on until you have a length for the neckline. Here are the stitch count charts. There's 2 of them. The numbers in bold on your left are the stitch counts, and next to these are 4 digits for the separations. I used the first set of digits for the tutorial as a sample only. It is way too small to fit anyone. Use the numbers as I explained by fitting round 1 first and then adjusting to the stitch count chart. Instructions on how to use this chart are to follow. I've continued on with this cord. So what I'm working here is just a sample. You'll see that mine is rather short. I've already worked this top, as you see here, and the number of stitches for my cord that I used was actually 117. So I followed 117 on that chart for my cord. But here, this is just a sample. I've only worked a few stitches for my cord. Now at this point, once you have a length of stitches for your cord, you'll take this cord and measure it around the circumference of the head of the person that you are making this for. When measuring, do not stretch and measure. Just take it as it is, and this must go around the head. So that way you know that this piece would definitely fit over the head of the person that you are making this for. And I choose to work this way. It gives me a guideline on where's my starting point for my patterns. Okay, so once you've done that, you can go ahead and count the number of stitches. You'll see here that there are stitches along this cord. So you'll count those stitches. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on. And you'll match that stitch count with the chart. I've counted the number of stitches here, and I initially had 77. To fit this into the chart, I needed to work 2 more stitches. So I worked 2 more, and that way I've got 79 stitches, which fits into the chart. Like I said, for my top, I had 117, and that fitted into the chart. So you'll adjust the cord so that it fits into the numbers in bold in the chart. Okay, so this is 79 stitches, and I know I've already measured this, and then I've adjusted my stitch count. Now I'll go ahead and separate this. So I'm separating it into my front, half the front body, then it's the sleeve, the back body, the sleeve, and half the front body. I often get this question on how many chains do I start with. You start with as many chains as need be to fit around the circumference of the head. That is our starting point. And then we adjust it to get to fit into the chart. So you add on a few more stitches so that that number of stitches fits into the chart, those numbers in bold. Okay, so continuing on, now I've got 79 stitches here. I've counted my cord. I'll go ahead and place those markings. You'll follow the chart for these markings. For 79 stitches, I'll need to place a stitch marker into the 13th stitch. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 13. And then it's the 27th stitch. So that's 14, 16, 18, 20, 2, 4, 6, and that's 27. And then it's the 53rd stitch. So that's 28, 30, 2, 4, 6, 8, 40, 2, 4, 6, 8, 50, and then that's 253. And then I've got the 67th stitch. So that's 53, 54, 6, 8, 60, 2, 4, 6, and 67 stitches. So I've got all my separations here. That will be the half the front body, then I've got the sleeve here, I've got the back body, I've got the sleeve here, and I've got half the front body. Like I said, this is only a sample, so it looks really small. Now continuing on, you'll go back to your smaller hook. In my case, I'm using a 4mm hook. Continuing on, round 2, chain 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Chain 4 counts as a double crochet and chain 1. Then it turn, skip 1 chain. So the next chain, you will not count the one from where our chain 4 comes out of. You count the next chain. So that's the one that you are skipping. Into your next chain, you'll work a double crochet. So it's yarn over, insert the hook into that next chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. And then it's chain 1, skip 1, double crochet. Okay, so you will find working with superfine yarn is completely different from working with DK, but it becomes easier as we go on into the pattern. So then you continue on with chain 1, skip 1, double crochet until you get to that first stitch marker. I've worked my way to that first stitch marker. You'll see that you will have 1 stitch remaining and then it's your stitch marker. So continuing on, it's chain 1, skip the 1 stitch, and into the one that's marked off with the stitch marker, you will work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. So this is the first corner, and into that corner I worked a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. There's 3 double crochets and 2 chain 1s in between. This you will work at all your corners for round 2. Replace your stitch marker into the center of those double crochets. This is the corner. Continuing on, it's chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet. Continue on until you get to your next stitch marker. I've continued on to my second stitch marker. Again, you'll see that you have 1 stitch remaining, and then it's your stitch marker. Remove your stitch marker. Then it's chain 1, skip that 1 stitch, and into that stitch marked off, work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. So here again at the next corner, it's a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And then I'll replace my stitch marker into the middle of those 3 double crochets. You continue on with this stitch pattern to the end of the round. So you're working your chain 1, skip 1, double crochet to your next stitch marker. At the stitch marker, you'll work double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Replace your stitch marker. That's really important, replacing the stitch marker. And then you'll continue on until you get to the end of the round. I've continued on with round 2. I worked those double crochet, chain 1s, skip 1s right through, and at my corners I worked a corner and I replaced all my stitch markers. At the end it was a chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet into my last chain. Round 3, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, chain 3 counts as a double crochet, and turn. So for this round I actually chose to change the pattern. You will see from this top that I worked, my sleeve is just the mesh detail, but when I get to the front and back body, I alternate between this mesh and rows of double crochet. So it's really up to you. If you want to continue on with this pattern throughout, you may by all means go do so. You will repeat the pattern with your chain 1, skip 1s, but I just wanted a slight change to the pattern. So here it's just mesh, and then here it's a mix of those stitches. Now we are starting off here with the front body. So for the front body, it's going to be double crochets into all chain 1 spaces and double crochets into all double crochets. So you're just working double crochets right through until you get to your first corner. Now this is for the front body. I've continued on working those double crochets into chain 1 spaces and into my stitches. Here I am at my first stitch markers. So these are those 3 stitches from the corner. You'll see that I've worked a double crochet into that chain 1 space right there. So then I'll continue on. I'll work a double crochet into that first double crochet, work a double crochet into the chain 1 space, remove my stitch marker, work a double crochet into that center double crochet, replace my stitch marker, now I'll be working the sleeve. So here I'm working the mesh stitch pattern. So right from this corner, here's my stitch that's marked off as my corner. Then it's going to be a chain 1, skip that chain 1 space and work a double crochet into the next double crochet. So I'll continue on with this stitch pattern, that's chain 1, skip 1, double crochet to my next corner. I've worked my way to the next corner. So as I get to that corner, I'll continue on with the chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, and then it's a chain 1. I'll skip 1 and into that stitch marked off as my corner, remove that stitch marker, work a double crochet into that double crochet, replace your stitch marker into that stitch, and then now here I'm continuing on. This is the back body. So here again I'll work double crochets into all stitches and into all chain 1 spaces. So right next to that stitch marked off, I have a chain 1 space. I'll work a double crochet into that space, a double crochet into the stitch, a double crochet into the space, and so on until I reach my next corner. I've worked my way to the next corner. So this was the back body. Here I am at my next corner. I'll continue on working double crochets into that chain 1 space and then into the corner stitch marked off. Remove that stitch marker, work a double crochet into that stitch, replace your stitch marker, and now we're working the next sleeve. So again here we're working the mesh detail. So then it's going to be a chain 1, skip that chain space, double crochet into the next stitch, then it's chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, and you'll continue on until you get to your next stitch marker. I've worked my way to the next stitch marker. So this was the second sleeve that we've just worked, and now we're working the next half of the front body. So here again I'm following my stitch pattern to that stitch marker, which is my chain 1, skip 1. I'll double crochet into that stitch marked off, replace my stitch marker, and then for the front body it's double crochets into all chain 1 spaces and double crochets. Continue on to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of the round. When you get to the end of the round, you'll work a double crochet into your chain space, and then it's a double crochet into the third chain from chain 4. Remember, we had started off the first round with a chain 4, so that also counts as a stitch and a chain 1 space. Now for the rest of the pattern, we'll repeat these 2 rounds, and you'll see here that your stitch pattern is different. So this was the front body, and then we've got the sleeve here. We've got the back body, which is the same as the front body when it comes to the stitch detail. And then here's the next sleeve, and then here's the second half of that front body. you'll continue on repeating these 2 rounds. So for your next round, it will be a chain 4, 2, 3, 4, just as I had done for round 2. Turn, then you're working skip 1, double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, continuing on until you get to your stitch marker. At the stitch marker, just as you had done for your previous round, the round 2, you'll work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into that stitch. Replace your stitch marker into the center of those 3 stitches, exactly as you had done in that round 2, and then you'll continue on repeating round 2, and then it's a repeat of round 3, which is your change in the stitch pattern, where you're working your mesh detail for just the sleeve portion, and you're working double crochets into all chain spaces and stitches for your back body and your front body. Here are the armhole depth measurements for the different sizes. You will need these measurements for the tutorial in the next clip. Use the measurement for the size that you are working. I've continued on with the yoke. I've repeated rounds 2 and rounds 3 until this yoke measures. Here it is. So yes, until this yoke measures 1.5 inches less than the armhole depth for the size that you are working. Now the armhole depth measurement for a size medium is 7.5 inches. Now if we look at my armhole depth right here, when measuring your armhole depth, you're measuring it at the shoulder and not at the neckline. So if I measured the armhole depth, it's 6 inches. That's 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters less than the armhole depth for a size medium. You'll work according to the armhole depth for the size that you are making. I've worked it 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters less than the required armhole depth for the size that I'm working. Now at this point, I'd like to go ahead and join these front edges so that I have this opening along the front to a certain point. This opening is adjustable. If you'd like it much deeper, you could continue on with a few more rounds. And if you'd like it a lot less deeper, obviously you could maybe work a few rounds or maybe stop 2 or 3 inches before that armhole depth measurement. The deeper you go, you're going to have this opening going down onto the bust. So you need to keep that into consideration when deciding on this front opening. Okay, so for my next round, I'm going to join these front edges, and thereafter we will be working in the round, unlike for this portion of the yoke where we had been working in rows. To continue on from the round that you have stopped at, you can see here that I stopped at a round 2 repeat, and then I'll chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I'll join to the opposite side by slip stitching into the 3rd chain. Now, I always prefer working directly down center front. If I decide to start off my next round here, I do go slightly off center front by 1 stitch. So what I'll do here is I'll turn and slip stitch into that first chain so that I get into the center of those 3 chains, or into the middle of those 3 chains. So you slip stitch there, slip stitch into the second chain. It is really tough sometimes working with these super fine yarns, but hang in there. And then you continue on with your next round. So it's chain 3, or if you need to work your chain 4, skip 1 double crochet, you may also chain 4. It all depends on which is your next round. Like in my case here, I'll be working double crochets into the chain 1 spaces as well. So then I'll work a double crochet into that next chain. And if you're skipping stitches, obviously you'll skip that first chain. And then I'll continue on with my stitch pattern. Following my stitch pattern for round 2 or round 3 repeat around this yoke until I get back to this starting point right here. I've worked my way to the end of this joining round, as you see here, and I followed my stitch pattern. Remember, I said depending on which round you stopped at, that's the round you'll continue with. So for me, it was this round 2 repeat. Then to end the round, I can slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3. If you were working around 3 repeat, you'll slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 4. So I've worked that double crochet into that first chain as well, the one that I had initially slip stitched into. Do not forget to work your stitch into that chain as well. If you were working a chain 1, skip 1 double crochet, that's when you would skip that chain and slip stitch into your 3rd chain from chain 4 to join. So then you'll continue on. Now, like I said, you work in the round, and it's going to be a chain 4 for the next round, depending on which round you're continuing with. In my case, I'll be working the chain 1, skip 1 double crochets, and then turn, and I'll continue on with my stitch pattern to the end of the round. It's just repeating round 2 and round 3, but this time we're working in the round. I've continued on with my yoke. I've repeated rounds 2 and rounds 3, and this was the joining round that you see here. And then I worked a few more rounds until my yoke, when I measure the armhole depth, it measures 7.5 inches. So that 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters is the armhole depth measurement for a size medium. You will work as many rounds as need be to get to the armhole depth measurement for the size that you are working. At this point, we are complete with the yoke. You can fasten off and cut off on the excess yarn. Now I'd like to begin at one of the corners, and that way, instead of having our seam running down the center front, we'll have the seam running along the side. Attach yarn to a corner. So I don't actually have my stitch markers here, but it would be the stitch which is marked off by your stitch marker. Attach yarn to that corner stitch. And then depending on which round you've stopped at, like here, I need to work around 3 repeats. So I'll chain 3. And then I'll continue on with double crochets into all stitches and into all chains. If you're working around 2 repeats, continue on with your chain 1, skip 1, double crochet. Continue on with your stitch pattern until you reach your next corner right here. I've worked my way along the front, so I started off at this corner stitch right there, and then I worked my stitch pattern along the front to my next corner. So it's the stitch that's marked off with that stitch marker. Then you'll chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Now for this chain, it is adjustable. You may adjust the chain by increasing the number of chains that you work. You can increase the number of chains by working more chains in an odd number. So that's in 3s, 5, 7, and so on, so that we are able to follow the stitch pattern. Now, when increasing on this chain, keep in mind that the longer the chain, the looser the fit of the sleeve and of the body. I've chained 3, and then I'll skip the stitches in between. These stitches make up the sleeve portion of this pattern, and I'll join with a double crochet into my next corner. So that's the stitch that's marked off with your stitch marker right here. You'll join with a double crochet into that stitch. And then you'll continue on with your stitch pattern until you get to your next corner. So here, in my case, I'm working the round 2 repeat, so it's just the double crochets into all those chain 1 spaces and into the stitches. If you are working your chain 1, skip 1 double crochet, you will continue on with your pattern. So it all depends on the round that you are following. Work your way to your next corner on the opposite side. I've worked my way to the next corner. So this was along the back. I've worked along the back of this yoke. Here's that corner. I've worked a double crochet into that stitch marked off with my stitch marker. Then it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3. So however many chains you've chained on the first side, you will do the same on the second side. And then you'll skip your stitches in between. These stitches make up the second sleeve, and you'll join to the next corner with a slip stitch into the third chain from chain 3. So here I've got an armhole space, and then on the opposite side I've got my armhole space. Now again, like we did for center front, if I continue on from here, I'll have my seam going slightly or 1 stitch away from that side, from the exact side. So what I'll do here is I'm going to turn and I'll slip stitch into that first chain. Slip stitch into the second chain, and then I'll continue on with my stitch pattern. In my case, I'm working my round 3 repeat, so it's going to be a chain 4, and then I'll skip the last chain, the third chain, and I'll work a double crochet into the next stitch. So that way I'm following my stitch pattern. If you're working around 2 repeat, it will be a chain 3, and you'll work a double crochet into that chain, and then you'll continue on working your double crochets. So you're always following your stitch pattern, those round 2 and round 3 repeats. Work your way all around the body. And when you get to the end, you can slip stitch to join, not forgetting to either skip the last chain or work your double crochet into that last chain, because it does count as a stitch. Then when you get to the end, you can slip stitch to join, and you'll repeat your rounds until you have worked your way to over the bust. I've continued on with a portion of the body. Here you'll see how many rounds I've worked. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I've worked 6 rounds. At this point, when I fit on this piece, it stops just below my bust. So you'll need to work as many rounds as need be for your piece to stop just below the bust. You'll see that I've also stopped at a round of double crochets. So here's my round of double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, and then I've stopped on my round of double crochets. For the next round, we need to adjust our stitch count so that we are able to work the lace pattern. Now, for this round here that I stopped at, I need to count my stitches, and then in the next round I can adjust it to a multiple of 9. That way I'm able to fit in the lace pattern in the following round. I've counted the number of stitches that I have for this round. I have 148 stitches. Now to increase it in the next round, I need to increase by 5 stitches, and that will make it 153 stitches. If I look at my calculations, 153 divided by 9, 9 goes into that figure 17 times. So you count the number of stitches you have, and then you add on stitches to bring it to a multiple of 9. Remember, we're all working different sizes, so you most probably will not have the same number of stitches as I do. But the only thing here is that you count your stitches and then see how many stitches you need to increase in the next round to bring it to a multiple of 9. In my case, I need to increase by 5 stitches. So for the next round, this is the increase round. I'm going to chain 3, turn, and here I'll work increases. Like I said, it's those 5 increases in my case. I'll work those increases and I'll space them apart. I choose to space them apart instead of working them one after the other. That way I don't have an increase in my stitch pattern just sort of all at one place, and I've spaced them evenly. So when you're working your increases, you'll work one here and then you leave a few stitches, work the next one, leave a few stitches, work the next one, and so on. That way you have your increases spaced apart. Okay, so for this round, we're working increases. And as I said, in my case, I'll be working 5 of them. To work an increase, you're working 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So here goes. I'll work a double crochet into that stitch, and then I'll work another double crochet into that same stitch. So that's an increase. And I'll continue on with double crochets into all stitches, and every now and then I'll work an increase, that way spacing them apart. Continue on to the end of the round. You work your increases and bring up your stitch count to a multiple of 9. I've continued on with that increase round to adjust my stitch pattern to a multiple of 9. Now if you look at it here, this was the round that I had stopped at, and that was the round that was stopped just under my bust, and then I worked that increase round, and then I worked another round of just double crochets. So I just chain 3, turned, and worked double crochets into all stitches. Now we'll work the lace pattern. So I'm going to call this round 1 of the lace pattern. It's chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Chain 3 always counts as a double crochet. Turn, double crochet into the next stitch. And now the stitch pattern for the rest of the round is chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, into the next stitch, work 3 double crochets, all into that one stitch. So that was 1, 2, 3, then it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, into the next 2 stitches, work 1 double crochet each. So here's the first double crochet into that first stitch, and here's my next double crochet into the next stitch. So that's your stitch pattern. It will be chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, 3 double crochets all into the next stitch. It's 1, 2, 3, then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, and a double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. It's 1 and 2. Continue on to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of that first round for the lace pattern. Here you see I've worked the 3 double crochet into 1 stitch, and then I've chained 3, and I'll skip the last 3 stitches. So it's 1, 2, 3, and I'll slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3 to join. Round 2 of the lace pattern, it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Now here we're not turning, we're continuing on with the pattern. Then into the next stitch, work a double crochet, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, single crochet into the chain 3 loop. So into that loop, insert your hook into that loop, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and go through 2 loops on the hook. Then it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, then single crochet into the next chain 3 loop, then it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and you'll work a double crochet into each of these stitches from the round before. So that's 1 double crochet and 2. That's your stitch pattern for round 2. It's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, single crochet into the chain 3 loop, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, single crochet into the next chain 3 loop, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and a double crochet each into these 2 stitches. Continue on with this stitch pattern. I've worked my way to the end of round 2. Here you can see that I've chained 3 and single crocheted into the last chain 3 loop. And then to end the round, it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3 to join. Round 3, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip the first loop, here's that first loop, into the 2nd loop, work 2 double crochets, that's 1, 2, chain 2, 1, 2, 2 double crochets. So you're working this all into that middle loop. It's the 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochets into that middle loop. Then it's chain 1, skip the 3rd loop, and then work a double crochet into each of these 2 double crochets. That's 1 and 2. So your stitch pattern for this round is chain 1, skip the first loop, into the middle loop, work 2 double crochets. It's 1, 2, chain 2, and 2 double crochets all into that center loop. Then chain 1, and it's a double crochet into each of these 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. You'll continue on with the stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of round 3. You'll see here that I worked this 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into that center chain 3 loop, and then I have 1 loop remaining. So I've chained 1 to end the round, slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3 to join. Round 4, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, double crochet into the next stitch, then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3. So here you're skipping the chain 1 and these 2 double crochets, and then you'll work 3 double crochets into that chain 2 space. That was 1, 2, 3. So here it is. Then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, skip 3, You're skipping the 2 double crochets and the chain 1 space, and you can work a double crochet into each of these 2 double crochets. So here goes 1, and here's my second. So that's the stitch pattern for round 4. It's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then into that chain 2 space, we'll work 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, then it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and into the 2 double crochets, work 1 double crochet each. It was 1 and 2. Continue on with your stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of round 4. You can see that I worked 3 double crochets into that last chain 2 space. Then I chain 3, and to end the round, slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3 to join. Round 5, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn. Here we're working double crochets all throughout this round. We'll work double crochets into all stitches. So it's a double crochet into every double crochet and 3 double crochets into every chain 3 loops. So here's a chain 3 loop. I'll work 3 double crochets into that loop. It's 1, 2, 3, and then into my stitches I'll work 1 double crochet into every stitch. 1, 2, 3. So I'll continue on with this stitch pattern. It's 3 double crochets into all these chain 3 loops and 1 double crochet into every double crochet from the round before. Here I have 2 double crochets, so I'll work a double crochet each. Continue on with the stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've continued on with the rest of the body for this top. Now the reason that I chose to continue on is that from here on out, it's just a repeat. So I'm continuing with the same rounds over and over again until I work my way to the length that I want this top at. Here you can see that I've worked this lace pattern. So that was once, twice, and 3 times to get me to the length for this top. So you'll work this pattern as many times as need be, and you'll also see that every time you work this pattern, this top flares out even more. That's because when we work this round 5 here, this is actually an increase round. So in actual fact, I continued on with my pattern. I completed round 5 by slip stitching to join. And then I went on to work round 6, which was chain 3, turn, and I worked double crochets into all stitches. At the same time, I counted the number of stitches that I had for my round 6. And then I needed to bring up my next round to a multiple of 9. So here we're just repeating this round as well, where we worked increases to bring it up to a multiple of 9. And then we worked our next round of double crochets. Like I said, it's just repeating that pattern sequence. So for your lace pattern, it's round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, and then round 5 was the round of double crochets. Work round 6. Here you'll bring up your stitch count to a multiple of 9, and then you'll work round 7, which is just chain 3, turn, working double crochets into all stitches. Thereafter you'll continue on again with round 1 to round 7. And then you'll continue on with round 1 to round 7 until you have the length that you're looking for. So I hope that makes sense, but like I said, we're just repeating these rounds over and over again. Make certain that after round 5, you adjust your stitch count to a multiple of 9, and then I chose to work, it would be 3 rounds of double crochets. So it's round 5, round 6, and round 7. Those were my rounds of double crochets, and then it was round 1 to round 5, which was my laced pattern. The most important thing here is to bring up your stitch count. In round 6, you can decide whether it's round 6 or round 7. It doesn't really make a difference, but you need to bring up your stitch count to a multiple of 9 so that you are able to work the lace pattern in between. For the sleeve, you'll see that I just worked the mesh stitch pattern here. We'll continue on with this stitch pattern until we get to the elbow. So we're just working a short portion of the sleeve. We'll get to the elbow, and then we'll work the same pattern that we had here at the sleeve, at the underarm, into one of those double crochets right there. Can attach yarn. Now we're continuing on with the mesh pattern. So it's chain 4. Chain 4 counts as a double crochet and chain 1. And then we'll skip a space. Now you'll see that it's really difficult. You don't really have your mesh detail right at the underarm, but you will improvise until you get back into that mesh detail. So here you see it. Now I'm just going to leave a space and work a double crochet. And then it's chain 1 and leave a space, work a double crochet, chain 1, leave a space, and work a double crochet. So you'll see as I get working, I'm eventually getting back into that mesh detail. So it's chain 1 and skip your chain 1 space, and it's a double crochet into the double crochet from the round before. You continue on with this mesh stitch detail until you get to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of the first round for the sleeve. Here you see it, and I've continued on with that mesh stitch detail. To end the round, it's chain 1, and you can slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 4 to join. Then for the next round, it's chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. Chain 4 counts as a double crochet and chain 1, and then you'll skip the first space and it's a double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet into the next stitch, and continue on with your mesh stitch detail until you get to the end of the round. When you get to the end, it's chain 1 and slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 4 to join. You continue on with this stitch pattern until you get to the elbow. So you've got to decide, or you take that measurement from your underarm to just before the elbow, and that's the length of this portion of the sleeve. I've continued on with the sleeve. I worked the mesh stitch detail up until just before my elbow, and thereafter I worked double crochets, rounds of double crochets. So it's 3 rounds of double crochets, where for my first round, it was chain 3 turn, and I worked double crochets into all chain 1 spaces and into all stitches from the round before, as you see here. And then I worked an increase round. Here again, I brought up my stitch count to a multiple of 9, just as I had done when I was working the lace pattern for the body. You've always got to bring it up to a multiple of 9. So I chose again to keep with that stitch pattern with 3 rounds of double crochets. So once I brought up my stitch count to a multiple of 9, I worked 1 more round of double crochet, and then it was my lace pattern. And again, I repeat that same stitch pattern. So I worked a round of double crochets for round 5, repeat, and then round 6 I brought up my stitch count to a multiple of 9. Then round 7 was a round of double crochets, and I repeated my lace pattern. Again, as you continue on repeating this lace pattern, you'll see here that the piece or your sleeve does flare out. So you'll repeat it as many times as need be, depending on how long you'd like your sleeve length and how much of this flare you'd like on your sleeve. You could also work the mesh stitch pattern right down. You could go further down the arm and then decide to flare out by working this lace stitch pattern. It's all up to you. You may adjust the pattern to your liking. So you'll repeat these steps for your second sleeve. Now we'll work the cord or these tie-ups for around the neckline. You'll see here that I've already worked one on the side. It's really easy. But before I work the other side, let me explain on how to add in a button if you'd rather prefer adding in a button. So with your tail end, you sort of, when weaving in this tail end, you leave behind a portion of this tail end, sort of as a loop, and then you weave in the rest into your top. And that way you create a loop that when you attach a button on the other end, right here, you're able to loop that button through. So that's how you would go about fitting on a button. But like I chose to create these ties, I'll show you how to work these. Before working these cords for your ties, I think it's best to weave in all your ends. Like here, I've got this tail end right at the top, so I'll show you how to weave in your ends before working in those cords. So all you're doing is threading it with your yarn needle, and then you're going back and forth into your stitches to lose this tail end. You can cut off on the excess. And you'll do the same for all your tail ends. Now to form this cord, so right at this edge here, into your last stitch, right there, you can bring in your yarn. So you need to sort of thread it through there. Use your hook to bring it through. And you'll pull in a long enough tail end, just as when you're working the actual cord itself. So you do need a long tail end here. So once you've got your yarn through that first stitch at the top, at the neckline, you get your hook back into that stitch. Now with your tail end, you wind it over that hook, just as you had done when you were actually working the cord, and then you yarn over and pull through. And then you continue on, wind the tail end over your hook and pull through on your yarn. Oops. So it's exactly as you had done when working the cord for your foundation round. And you continue on until you have the length that you're looking for. I've continued on with the cord to the length that I wanted it at. Once you're done, you can fasten off, pull up a tail end and cut off. Now to lose the tail ends, you weave this tail end back into the cord. So you can also knot up on that end before doing so. And then weave it into the cord itself. You'll work the cord for the other side just as you had done for this, so that you have them on either side as I have done here, and weave in all your ends to complete. And that does it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching and I hope you've enjoyed it.